The blood on Josephine Turner's hands was warm, but she barely noticed it as she knelt beside the mare in the dusty stable, her fingers working quickly to help deliver the foal that had been stuck for the past hour. People in Marfa, Texas said she had a gift with animals, though they said other things too, whispered things that followed her like tumbleweeds in the wind. The year was 1883, and Josephine had learned long ago that small towns had long memories and even longer tongues. The foal slipped free with a final effort, and Josephine sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her arm. The mare immediately began cleaning her baby, and the sight brought both joy and ache to Josephine's chest. She was 23 years old, and according to the town healer and half the gossiping women at the general store, she would never know the feeling of holding her own child. You got a touch with the animals, girl, but that is all you will ever birth, old Mrs. Patterson had told her 2 years ago after examining her following a riding accident. The woman claimed to have second sight, said she could feel the emptiness in Josephine's womb, a darkness that would never quicken with life. The story spread through Marfa faster than a prairie fire, and with it came the sympathetic looks and the whispered word, "Cursed." Josephine stood, brushing straw from her worn leather riding skirts. She refused to wear the fancy dresses the other women favored, finding them impractical for the work she did. Her father had owned a small ranch before he died 3 years back, leaving it to her with debts that threatened to swallow it whole. She had sold most of the cattle, kept a few horses, and made her living helping with difficult animal births and breaking horses that others deemed too wild. The stable door creaked open, and Thomas McCain, the owner of the mare, stepped inside. His face broke into a relieved smile when he saw the foal trying to stand on wobbly legs. "Miss Turner, you have done it again," he said, pulling out a small leather pouch. "I was certain we would lose them both." Josephine accepted the payment, tucking it into her pocket. "The mare did all the work. I just helped guide things along." "Still, you have a gift," Thomas said, then his face colored slightly, as if remembering what else people said about her gifts. "That is, I mean to say, we are grateful." Josephine gave him a tight smile and gathered her supplies. She had learned not to linger, not to make people uncomfortable with her presence. The curse might be nonsense, but people treated it as real, and that made it real enough in a town like Marfa. The sun was beginning to set as she led her horse, a sturdy buckskin mare named Honey, back toward her small ranch on the outskirts of town. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the desert stretched endlessly in all directions, dotted with scrub brush and the occasional yucca plant. She loved this land despite its harshness, loved the way it demanded strength from those who tried to tame it. She was nearly home when she heard the sound of hoofbeats behind her. Josephine turned to see a rider approaching at a steady pace, and even in the fading light, she could make out the confident way he sat his horse. As he drew closer, she recognized him as Preston Hayes, the new foreman at the Double R Ranch, the largest spread in the area. "Miss Turner," he called out, slowing his horse to match her pace. "Forgive the intrusion. I was told you might be heading this way." Josephine studied him carefully. Preston Hayes had arrived in Marfa about 6 months ago, brought in by Robert Richardson to run his sprawling ranch. He was probably around 27 or 28, with sun-weathered skin and eyes that were a startling shade of blue against his tanned face. He wore his hat low, and his clothes marked him as a working cowboy, not one of the fancy ranch owners who let others do the dirty work. "What can I do for you, Mr. Hayes?" she asked, keeping her voice neutral. "Preston, please," he said with an easy smile. "We have a situation at the ranch. One of our best mares is having trouble with a birth, been at it since this morning." Doc Wilson tried to help but said he could not figure what was wrong. Someone mentioned you might be willing to take a look. Josephine hesitated. The double R was a significant operation, and helping them could mean good money, but it would also mean spending time around the ranch hands, enduring their stares and whispers. Preston seemed to sense her reluctance. "I will pay double your usual rate," he said quietly. "And I will personally ensure none of the men bother you." There was something in his tone, a sincerity that made her believe him. Besides, she could not stand the thought of an animal suffering if she might be able to help. "Lead the way," she said. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the evening calls of birds settling in for the night. Preston did not try to fill the silence with empty chatter, and Josephine appreciated that. Too many people either talked too much around her or avoided speaking altogether. "You have been in Marfa long?" she finally asked. "6 months now," Preston replied. "Came up from San Antonio way." Heard Richardson was looking for someone who knew cattle and horses, and I needed a change of scenery. "What kind of change?" He was quiet for a moment. "The kind where you leave behind things that did not work out the way you hoped." Josephine understood that well enough. They all had things they were running from or toward in this territory. The Double R Ranch sprawled across the landscape like a small town itself. The main house was an impressive 2-story structure with a wide porch, and surrounding it were numerous outbuildings, corrals, and bunkhouses. Preston led her directly to the largest stable, where several ranch hands stood around looking concerned. "She is in the back stall," Preston said, dismounting and coming around to help Josephine down. She did not really need the assistance, but she accepted his offered hand. His grip was strong and warm, calloused from years of work. Inside the stable, Josephine found the mare lying on her side, breathing heavily. The animal's eyes were wide with distress, and Josephine felt the familiar pull of purpose that always came when faced with a creature in need. She knelt beside the mare, running her hands gently over the swollen belly. "Everyone out except Mr. Hayes," she said firmly. "She is stressed enough without an audience." The ranch hands filed out, though she heard their murmured conversations outside. Preston stayed near the door, giving her space to work but remaining close enough to help if needed. Josephine spent the next 3 hours working with the mare. The foal was positioned wrong, and it took all her skill and patience to slowly, carefully maneuver it into the right position. Her arms ached and sweat soaked through her shirt, but she kept working, speaking softly to the mare the entire time. Preston proved himself useful, following her instructions without question, bringing clean water and blankets when she asked, holding the lantern steady so she could see what she was doing. He did not flinch at the blood or the mess, and he did not pepper her with questions or doubt her methods. Finally, just when Josephine was beginning to fear they might lose both mare and foal, the baby slipped free. It was a beautiful colt, dark as midnight with a white star on its forehead. The mare immediately began cleaning him, and within minutes he was trying to stand. Josephine sat back, her entire body trembling with exhaustion. Preston was beside her immediately, offering a canteen of water. "You did it," he said, and there was genuine admiration in his voice. "That was remarkable." "The mare did the hard part," Josephine said, taking a long drink. The water was cool and sweet. "No," Preston said firmly. "What you just did, that took real skill. I have been around horses my whole life, and I have never seen anyone work like that." Josephine looked at him, searching for signs of mockery or false flattery, but found only honesty in his blue eyes. It unsettled her in a way she could not quite name. "I should clean up," she said, standing on unsteady legs. Preston caught her elbow when she swayed. "Come up to the house," he said. "You can wash up properly there and cook will have supper ready. You have earned a meal." Josephine wanted to refuse, wanted to collect her payment and ride home where things were safe and predictable, but her body was exhausted and the thought of food made her stomach growl audibly. Preston grinned. "I will take that as a yes." The ranch house kitchen was warm and bright, and the cook, a plump Mexican woman named Rosa, fussed over Josephine like she was a lost child. She showed her to a washroom where Josephine scrubbed away the blood and birthing fluids, wishing she had clean clothes to change into. When she returned to the kitchen, Rosa had laid out a feast: tender beef, beans, fresh tortillas, and vegetables that must have come from a carefully tended garden. Preston joined her at the table, and they ate in comfortable silence for a while. Josephine could not remember the last time she had shared a meal with someone, and certainly not someone who seemed so at ease with her presence. "The men talk about you," Preston said suddenly, then held up a hand when she stiffened. "I do not put stock in gossip, but I am curious about something." "What is that?" Josephine asked warily. "Why you are so good at bringing life into the world, yet they say you cannot." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Have children of your own." Most people danced around the subject or pretended not to know. Preston's directness was surprisingly refreshing. "When I was 21, I had a riding accident," Josephine said. "Old Mrs. Patterson examined me after. She is the closest thing Marfa has to a doctor for women's ailments. She said something was wrong inside me, that I would never conceive. Then she told everyone I was cursed, that God had marked me barren for some sin." "What sin?" Preston asked, his voice edged with anger that surprised her. Josephine shrugged. "She never said. I think she just likes having the attention of knowing things others do not. Or maybe she truly believes she has the sight. Either way, the damage was done. And you believe her. Does it matter what I believe? Everyone else does." Preston set down his fork and looked at her intently. "It matters to me." Josephine felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I do not know what to believe. I know I have pain sometimes in my belly. I know my monthly courses are irregular, but cursed, I cannot say." "Sounds more like injury than curse," Preston said practically. "And even if it were true, what of it? A woman is more than her ability to bear children." Tears pricked at Josephine's eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. The women of Marfa pitied her, and the men avoided her as if her barrenness might be catching, or as if she was less than a woman without the promise of children. "Thank you for saying that," she managed. They finished their meal, and Preston insisted on riding partway home with her despite her protests. The moon was full, casting silver light across the desert landscape. "I would like to see you again," Preston said as they neared her property. "Not for horse doctoring, though you are welcome at the ranch anytime. I mean, I would like to call on you properly if you would allow it." Josephine's heart hammered in her chest. "You know what people say about me." "I know what I saw tonight," Preston replied. "I saw a woman who is skilled and dedicated and kinder to animals than most people are to each other. That is what matters to me." "People will talk," she warned. "Let them," Preston said simply. "I have never lived my life according to what people think I should do, not about to start now." Josephine found herself smiling despite her reservations. "All right then, Preston Hayes, you may call on me." His face broke into a wide grin. "Sunday afternoon, I could bring a picnic and we could ride out to those hills you can see from your place." "Sunday afternoon," she agreed. True to his word, Preston arrived at her small ranch on Sunday afternoon with a packed lunch and a smile that made something flutter in Josephine's chest. She had changed her clothes 3 times that morning, finally settling on her nicest riding skirt and a blue blouse that brought out the hazel in her eyes. They rode out into the hills, following a path that wound between rock formations and desert vegetation. Preston told her about growing up on a small ranch in South Texas, about learning to rope and ride almost before he could walk. His father had died when Preston was 15, and he had worked various ranches ever since, learning the business from the ground up. "What about you?" he asked as they stopped to eat lunch near a small spring. "How did you learn to help with animal births?" Josephine smiled at the memory. "My father, he had this way with horses, could gentle the wildest mustang with patience and soft words. He taught me everything he knew. When animals started having trouble, people would call for him. After he died, they started calling for me instead, at least some of them." "He must have been proud of you," Preston said softly. "I think he was," Josephine replied, "though he worried about me too. He knew how this town could be, how they would treat me after Mrs. Patterson spread her story." Preston reached over and took her hand. "I am sorry for that, sorry that people have been cruel." "It is what it is," Josephine said, but she did not pull her hand away. His touch felt right, solid and warm and safe. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. Preston told her about his travels, the different towns and ranches he had worked. Josephine shared her dreams of expanding her small ranch, maybe breeding horses properly instead of just helping others with theirs. "You could do it," Preston said with conviction. "You have the knowledge and the skill. You just need the capital to get started." "Capital I do not have," Josephine said wryly. "I am still paying off my father's debts." "What if you had a partner?" Preston asked carefully. "Someone who could invest in the venture, help with the heavy work." Josephine looked at him sharply. "We have known each other less than a week." "True enough," Preston admitted. "But sometimes you just know when something is right. I felt it the moment I saw you working with that mare, the way you cared about doing everything you could to save them both. That is the kind of person I want in my life." "Preston," Josephine said slowly, "I need you to understand something. If what Mrs. Patterson said is true, I will never give you children. Most men want heirs, want someone to pass their name to." Preston shifted closer to her. "Josephine, I have spent years drifting from place to place, never putting down roots because nothing felt like home. But sitting here with you, talking about building something together, that feels like home. Children would be wonderful, but they are not why I want to be with you. I want to be with you because you make me want to be a better man, because your strength inspires me, because when you smile it feels like sunrise after a long night." No one had ever spoken to her like that before. Josephine felt tears sliding down her cheeks, and she did not try to stop them. "I am scared," she admitted. "Scared to hope, scared to believe this is real." Preston cupped her face gently in his hands. "It is real, Josephine, as real as the ground beneath us and the sky above. I am not going anywhere." When he kissed her, it was soft and sweet and full of promise. Josephine let herself fall into it, let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have this. The next few months passed in a blur of happiness that Josephine had never expected to experience. Preston courted her properly, riding out to her ranch several times a week, helping her with repairs and chores, bringing her small gifts like wildflowers or ribbons for her hair. The town gossips had a field day, of course, whispering about how Preston must not know about the curse, or how he would surely leave once he realized the truth. But Preston did not leave. Instead, he became a constant presence in her life, solid and dependable as stone. He talked about their future with such certainty that Josephine started to believe in it too. They made plans for combining their resources, for starting a horse breeding operation that would use her knowledge and his business connections. Robert Richardson, owner of the Double R, was surprisingly supportive. He had been impressed with Josephine's work with his mare and colt, and when Preston approached him about potentially investing in their venture, Richardson had been interested. "You have a good head on your shoulders, Hayes," Richardson told them one afternoon in his study. "And Miss Turner here has skills that are rare and valuable. I would be willing to provide capital in exchange for first pick of your foals and a percentage of profits." It was a fair deal, more than fair, and Josephine felt dizzy with the possibility of it all. For the first time since her father's death, she could see a real future stretching out before her. But not everyone in Marfa was happy about Preston and Josephine's courtship. Mrs. Patterson, in particular, seemed to take personal offense at Preston's disregard for her prophecy. "That man is a fool," she declared loudly at the general store one day when Josephine came in for supplies. "Tying himself to a cursed woman. Mark my words, nothing good will come of it." Josephine tried to ignore her, but Mrs. Patterson was not finished. "I have the sight, girl, and I know what I saw in you. Your womb is dead, cold as winter ground. You will bring that man nothing but sorrow." "That is enough," a firm voice said. Josephine turned to see Preston standing in the doorway, his face hard. "You will not speak to her that way." "I speak the truth," Mrs. Patterson said stubbornly. "You speak cruelty disguised as truth," Preston replied coldly. "And there is nothing godly or righteous about that. Come on, Josephine." They left the store with Josephine's cheeks burning. Preston loaded her purchases into her wagon, his jaw tight. "I am sorry," he said finally. "Sorry that you have to endure that kind of treatment." "It is not your fault," Josephine said. "No, but I can stand beside you through it," Preston said, "and I will for as long as you will have me." That evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sun set, Preston took her hand. "Marry me, Josephine." She looked at him, startled. "Preston, we have not even discussed." "I know," he said. "And I know all the reasons you might say no, but I also know that I love you, have loved you almost from the first moment I saw you. I want to spend my life with you, building our ranch, caring for our horses, growing old together. Say yes." Josephine thought about all the reasons she should refuse, all the ways this could end badly. But she also thought about how happy she had been these past months, how Preston had never once treated her as less than whole, how he had stood up for her against the town gossips. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Preston let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around until she was laughing and dizzy. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, and Josephine felt something inside her unfurl, some tight knot of fear and pain loosening at last. They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Marfa. Robert Richardson stood up for Preston, and Rosa, the cook from the Double R, stood with Josephine. Not many townspeople attended, but Josephine did not care. The people who mattered were there, and that was enough. Mrs. Patterson made her feelings known by standing outside the church and loudly proclaiming that the marriage was doomed, that Josephine's barrenness would poison their union. Preston simply walked past her with his head high, Josephine's hand firmly in his. Their wedding night was gentle and sweet, Preston taking his time to show Josephine how much he cherished her. She had been nervous, worried that the act might cause the pain she sometimes felt in her belly. But Preston was so careful with her, so attentive to her needs, that she felt only pleasure and connection. Afterward, lying in his arms in the small bedroom of her ranch house, which was now their ranch house, Josephine felt truly at peace for the first time in years. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Preston replied, kissing the top of her head. "And we are going to build an amazing life together, you and I." They threw themselves into the work of establishing their horse breeding operation. Richardson came through with his investment, and they were able to purchase several quality mares and a fine stallion. Preston proved to be as knowledgeable about horses as he had claimed, and together with Josephine's skills, they made a formidable team. The work was hard, from sunup to sundown most days, but it was satisfying in a way nothing else had been. Josephine loved watching the horses thrive under their care, loved seeing their plans slowly come to fruition. Preston was by her side through all of it, his strength and optimism carrying her through the difficult days. The first foals from their breeding program arrived in the spring, 10 months after their wedding. Josephine helped deliver each one, and Preston watched with admiration as she worked her magic, coaxing new life into the world with skill and patience. "You are amazing," he told her after the last foal was born, a spirited little filly with her mother's fine lines. "We are amazing," Josephine corrected, leaning against him tiredly. "I could not do this without you." That summer, Josephine began feeling unwell. At first, she attributed it to the hard work and the Texas heat, but when the nausea persisted, and she found herself exhausted by mid-afternoon, Preston insisted she see a doctor. The problem was that Marfa's only doctor for women's ailments was Mrs. Patterson, and Josephine would rather suffer than put herself in that woman's hands again. Instead, Preston arranged for them to travel to Fort Davis, a larger town about 20 miles away, where a proper doctor had recently established a practice. Dr. Samuel Morrison was a kind man in his 50s who had trained back east before deciding to bring modern medicine to West Texas. He listened carefully as Josephine described her symptoms, then conducted a thorough examination. "Mrs. Hayes," he said when he was finished, his eyes twinkling with barely suppressed delight, "I am pleased to inform you that you are with child, about 3 months along, I would estimate." Josephine stared at him in shock. "That is impossible. I was told I could never conceive." "Who told you that?" Dr. Morrison asked. "Mrs. Patterson, back in Marfa. She examined me after a riding accident and said my womb was damaged, that I was cursed to be barren." Dr. Morrison's face darkened. "Mrs. Patterson has no medical training whatsoever. Her examinations are based on superstition and guesswork. From what I can determine, you had some scarring from your accident that may have made conception more difficult, but clearly not impossible. You are quite definitely pregnant." Preston, who had been waiting anxiously outside, nearly broke down the door when Josephine called for him. When she told him the news, he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "Careful," Dr. Morrison said with a smile. "She is in a delicate condition." Sorry," Preston said, setting her down gently but keeping his arms around her. "I just cannot believe it. We are going to have a baby." The ride back to Marfa was filled with excited planning and disbelief. Josephine kept touching her belly, trying to reconcile what she had believed about herself for so long with this new reality growing inside her. "We have to tell people," Preston said. "Especially Mrs. Patterson. She needs to know how wrong she was." "Preston, no," Josephine said. "Let us just keep it to ourselves for now. I want to be sure, want to get further along before we say anything." But keeping such news quiet in a small town proved impossible. Rosa noticed Josephine's condition when they stopped by the Double R to update Richardson on the ranch's progress. The cook took one look at Josephine's face and the way she held herself and immediately knew. "You are expecting," she said with certainty, pulling Josephine into a warm embrace. "Oh, this is wonderful news. Please do not tell anyone yet," Josephine begged. "I am not ready for the whole town to know." Rosa promised to keep the secret, but news has a way of spreading in small communities. Within 2 weeks, it seemed everyone in Marfa knew that the cursed Josephine Hayes was pregnant. The reactions were mixed. Some people were genuinely happy for them, seeing it as proof that Mrs. Patterson's prophecies were not infallible. Others suggested that the child could not possibly be Preston's, that Josephine must have been with another man. Preston nearly got into a fistfight with a ranch hand who suggested as much in the saloon. It took 3 men to pull him off, and afterward, no one dared question the paternity of the baby in Preston's hearing. Mrs. Patterson, meanwhile, doubled down on her predictions. "The child will not live," she proclaimed. "Mark my words, a cursed womb cannot carry a baby to term. She will lose it before 5 months. Her words terrified Josephine, who had already been anxious about the pregnancy. What if the old woman was right? What if there was something wrong inside her that would prevent her from carrying the baby? Preston held her close that night as she cried out her fears. "You listened to me," he said firmly. "Dr. Morrison, a real trained doctor, examined you and said you were healthy. That baby is growing inside you right now, strong and safe. Mrs. Patterson is a bitter old woman who cannot stand to be proven wrong. Do not give her words power over you." "But what if something does go wrong?" Josephine whispered. "Then we will face it together," Preston said. "But I believe with everything in me that you are going to have this baby, that we are going to be parents. You have to believe it too." The 5-month mark came and went, and Josephine was still pregnant, her belly growing rounder each day. Mrs. Patterson, when confronted with this evidence, simply changed her prediction. "The birth will kill her then," she said. "A cursed body cannot deliver a living child without paying the ultimate price." This new prediction spread through town, and suddenly people started treating Josephine as if she was already dead. Women would stop by with casseroles and offers to help, speaking in hushed voices about how sorry they were. It infuriated Preston and terrified Josephine. "We are going back to Fort Davis," Preston announced one morning. "We are going to stay there for the last months of your pregnancy, and Dr. Morrison is going to deliver our baby. I will not have you spending your pregnancy surrounded by people who expect you to die." It was a drastic decision, but Josephine was relieved. They arranged for one of the ranch hands to look after their horses and property, and made the journey to Fort Davis. Dr. Morrison helped them find a small house to rent, and they settled in to wait for the baby's arrival. Those months in Fort Davis were peaceful in a way Marfa had never been. The people there did not know Josephine's history, did not treat her as cursed or doomed. She could walk down the street with her pregnant belly and receive only smiles and congratulations. It was a revelation. Preston found work helping at a local stable to earn extra money, and in the evenings they would sit together, Preston's hand on her belly feeling the baby kick and move. "What should we name him?" Preston asked one night. "What if it is a girl?" Josephine countered. "Then we will name her after someone strong and beautiful," Preston said, kissing her. Just like her mother. When Josephine went into labor on a cool November morning, Preston was by her side immediately. Dr. Morrison was called and he arrived calm and prepared. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours, but Dr. Morrison never seemed concerned. "First babies often take their time," he said encouragingly. "You are doing beautifully, Mrs. Hayes." Preston held her hand through every contraction, wiped her face with cool cloths, and whispered words of love and encouragement. When Josephine was certain she could not push any more, could not endure another moment, Dr. Morrison smiled broadly. "One more push, Mrs. Hayes. Your baby is almost here." With a final tremendous effort, Josephine pushed, and suddenly the room was filled with the sound of a baby crying. Strong, healthy cries that made tears stream down both parents' faces. "It is a boy," Dr. Morrison announced, placing the squirming, wailing infant on Josephine's chest. "A fine, healthy boy." Josephine looked down at her son, at his red face and tiny fists, and felt her heart expand with love so fierce it almost hurt. Preston was crying openly, his hand gentle on the baby's small head. "He is perfect," Preston whispered. "You did it, Josephine. You brought our son into the world." They named him Thomas Patrick Hayes after Preston's father. He was a healthy baby, nursing well and growing stronger each day. Dr. Morrison examined both mother and child thoroughly and pronounced them both in excellent health. "Mrs. Patterson was wrong about everything," he told them. "Your body is perfectly capable of bearing children, Mrs. Hayes. In fact, I see no reason why you could not have more if you wished." When Thomas was 6 weeks old, they made the journey back to Marfa. Josephine held her son close as they rode into town, and Preston sat tall in the saddle beside her, his pride evident in every line of his body. The town's reaction was stunned silence. People lined the street, staring at the healthy baby in Josephine's arms as if he was a ghost. Mrs. Patterson stood outside the general store, her face pale and pinched. Preston reined his horse to a stop directly in front of her. "This is our son, Thomas," he said clearly, his voice carrying down the street. "Born healthy and whole to my wife, who you claimed was cursed. You were wrong, Mrs. Patterson. Wrong about the curse, wrong about Josephine, wrong about everything. Mrs. Patterson opened her mouth, then closed it again. For once, she had nothing to say. "I hope you will think twice before declaring someone cursed again," Preston continued. "Your words have power in this town, and you use that power to cause pain and spread fear. That is not healing, and it is not godly." He did not wait for a response, simply turned his horse, and they continued down the street toward their ranch. Behind them, Josephine could hear the excited murmur of conversation breaking out, but she did not care. She had her husband, her son, and her life. That was all that mattered. Life on the ranch took on a new rhythm with Thomas in their lives. He was a happy baby, content to nap in a basket near wherever Josephine was working. She had worried about balancing motherhood with the work of the ranch, but somehow they made it work. Preston took on more of the physical labor, and Josephine focused on the breeding program and training horses when Thomas was sleeping. Their first crop of horses sold well, and Richardson was so pleased with the quality that he increased his investment. Other ranchers began approaching them about breeding programs, and slowly but surely, the Hayes Ranch became known throughout the region for producing fine horses. The town's attitude toward Josephine shifted dramatically after Thomas's birth. Women who had avoided her now sought her advice, both about horses and about overcoming difficult odds. Mrs. Patterson's influence waned, especially after 3 other women she had declared barren went on to have children. "Seems like maybe she just tells women what they fear most," Rosa observed one day when she visited to meet Thomas. "And people believe her because they are already afraid." Josephine thought there was truth in that. Fear was a powerful thing, and Mrs. Patterson had wielded it like a weapon. But love, Josephine had learned, was more powerful still. Preston's unwavering love and belief in her had given her the courage to hope, to believe that maybe she could have the things she wanted after all. Thomas was 2 years old when Josephine discovered she was pregnant again. This time, there was no fear, no anxiety about whether her body could carry a child. She and Preston celebrated the news with joy and excitement. "I was hoping for a whole house full of children," Preston admitted, holding Thomas on his lap while his other hand rested on Josephine's still flat belly. "Let us see how we manage with 2 first," Josephine said with a laugh. Their daughter was born on a bright spring morning, arriving so quickly that they barely had time to call for Dr. Morrison, who had become a family friend and made regular trips to Marfa now that his practice was well established. She was a tiny thing with a cap of dark hair and her father's blue eyes. They named her Elizabeth Rose Hayes, and Thomas was absolutely smitten with his baby sister. He would sit beside her cradle for hours, singing to her in his childish voice and bringing her his favorite toys. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered, growing from their initial small operation into one of the most respected horse breeding facilities in West Texas. Preston and Josephine worked side by side, their partnership as strong in business as it was in marriage. Thomas grew into a thoughtful, intelligent boy who loved horses as much as his parents did. Elizabeth was more wild, always running, always exploring, fearless in a way that terrified and delighted her parents in equal measure. When Thomas was 8 and Elizabeth was 6, Josephine discovered she was pregnant for a third time. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two, and Dr. Morrison recommended more rest. Preston immediately hired additional help for the ranch and insisted Josephine cut back on her work. "We have built something good here," he told her. "It will run without you micromanaging every detail. Take care of yourself and our baby." Their second son was born in late autumn, and they named him Daniel James Hayes. He was a calm, peaceful baby who seemed content to watch the world with wide, curious eyes. With 3 children and a thriving business, life was full and busy, and sometimes chaotic. But it was also filled with love and laughter, and the deep satisfaction of building something meaningful together. One evening when Thomas was 12, Elizabeth was 10 and Daniel was 4, the family sat on their porch watching the sunset. It had become a tradition over the years, this time of gathering together at the end of the day. "Tell us the story again," Elizabeth demanded, as she often did. "About how Papa proved the curse wrong." Preston looked at Josephine, his eyes warm with love and memory. "Your mother was never cursed," he said. "She was just waiting for the right time and the right person to build a life with." "But everyone said she could not have babies," Thomas interjected. He was old enough now to understand the significance of what had happened. "People say a lot of things," Josephine said, pulling Daniel onto her lap. "They said I was cursed, that I would never have children, that I would die if I tried. But none of it was true. Sometimes people are wrong, even when they believe they are right." "How did you know to not believe them?" Elizabeth asked. Preston reached over and took Josephine's hand. "Because I knew your mother. I saw her strength and her skill and her kind heart. And I knew that someone that full of life and love could not possibly be cursed. Sometimes you have to trust what you know in your heart over what other people tell you." "And Papa loved Mama enough to prove everyone wrong," Thomas added. "We proved them wrong together," Josephine corrected. "Love is not just one person loving another. It is both people choosing each other, supporting each other, believing in each other even when the world says it is impossible." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Josephine looked around at her family, at the ranch they had built, at the life they had created together, and felt overwhelming gratitude. She thought about the scared, lonely young woman she had been, convinced she would never have the things she wanted most. That woman could never have imagined this moment, this fullness, this joy. Preston squeezed her hand, and she looked over to find him watching her with the same expression he had worn the day they met, equal parts admiration and love. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "How lucky I am," Josephine replied. "How lucky we are." "Not luck," Preston said, pulling her close. "Love. Love and hard work and faith in each other." The children groaned at their parents' display of affection, but they were smiling too. They had grown up surrounded by love, and it showed in their confidence and kindness. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Josephine thought about Mrs. Patterson, who had died the previous winter, still insisting to the end that she had the sight. The old woman had never acknowledged being wrong about Josephine, never apologized for the pain her words had caused. But Josephine had learned to let go of that anger, to forgive even when forgiveness was not asked for, because holding on to bitterness only poisoned her own happiness. The ranch continued to thrive over the following years. Thomas showed an aptitude for the business side of things, learning to negotiate deals and manage accounts with a skill that impressed even Richardson, who had become like an uncle to the Hayes children. Elizabeth had inherited her mother's gift with difficult horses, able to gentle even the wildest mustang with patience and soft words. Daniel was still young, but he showed promise in training, his calm demeanor perfect for working with skittish animals. When Thomas was 16, a young woman from Fort Davis came to the ranch looking for work. Her name was Sarah Miller, and she was running from an arranged marriage her father had tried to force on her. Josephine took one look at the frightened, determined girl and offered her a job and a place to stay. Preston did not question the decision, trusting his wife's judgment. Sarah proved to be a hard worker and became like a daughter to Josephine and Preston. She was there to help when Josephine, at 42 years old and to everyone's surprise including her own, discovered she was pregnant for a fourth time. "Are you sure you are not worried?" Preston asked her one night as they lay in bed. "You are older now, and Dr. Morrison said it carries more risk." "I am not worried," Josephine said, and she meant it. "My body has done this 3 times before. It knows what to do." The pregnancy was indeed more difficult, with more aches and pains than previous ones, but Josephine managed it with her usual determination. Dr. Morrison made frequent visits, monitoring her carefully, but he remained optimistic. "You are as strong as any woman I have ever treated," he told her. "Age is less important than overall health, and you have that in abundance." Their final child was born on a warm summer evening, a daughter they named Grace Ann Hayes. She arrived easily, as if eager to join the family, and her siblings were enchanted with her from the first moment. "Our family is complete now," Preston said, holding Grace while their other children crowded around to see their new sister. 4 beautiful children, a successful ranch, and the love of my life by my side. I could not ask for more." Josephine looked around at her family, at the children she had been told she would never have, at the husband who had loved her when the world said she was less than whole, and felt tears of pure joy streaming down her face. "We did it," she whispered. "We proved them all wrong." "No," Preston corrected gently. "We proved them irrelevant. Their words, their beliefs, their curses, none of it mattered because we had something stronger. We had each other." As the years continued to pass, the Hayes Ranch became legendary throughout Texas. People came from hundreds of miles away to purchase their horses, and both Josephine and Preston were frequently asked to consult on breeding programs. They became wealthy, though they remained grounded, never forgetting the lean years when they were first starting out. Thomas married Sarah when he turned 21, and they took over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch. Elizabeth fell in love with a kind veterinarian from Fort Davis, and they settled nearby, allowing her to continue working with the ranch horses. Daniel, always the quietest of the children, surprised everyone by announcing at 18 that he wanted to study medicine, inspired by Dr. Morrison. Grace, the youngest, grew up to be as spirited as her sister Elizabeth had been, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determination. She declared at age 10 that she was going to travel the world and write books about horses, and no one doubted she would do exactly that. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Preston and Josephine threw a celebration at the ranch. It seemed like half of Texas showed up, along with friends they had made over the years from across the state and beyond. Richardson gave a toast, talking about how he had taken a chance on a young foreman and a supposedly cursed woman, and how it had turned out to be the best business decision he had ever made. But more than that, Richardson said, his voice thick with emotion. I have watched two people build a life together through hard work, mutual respect, and unshakable love. They have shown us all what is possible when you refuse to accept other people's limitations. Later that evening, when the guests had gone home and the children were settled, Preston and Josephine walked out to the hills where they had gone on their first ride together. The moon was full, just as it had been that night so many years ago. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" Josephine asked, leaning against Preston's solid warmth. "If you had believed the curse, if you had listened to what people said about me." "Not even once," Preston said firmly. "From the moment I met you, I knew you were special. I knew you were meant to be mine, and I was meant to be yours. All the rest was just noise." "I love you," Josephine said, the words as true and powerful as they had been the first time she said them. "I love you for seeing me when others only saw what they thought I lacked. I love you for believing in me, for standing beside me, for giving me the family I thought I would never have." "I love you too," Preston replied, pulling her close. "And I would choose you again, every single time, curse or no curse, children or no children. You are my home, Josephine Hayes. You always have been." They stood there under the stars, two people who had defied expectations and overcome prejudice to build something beautiful and lasting. The ranch spread out before them, a testament to their hard work and dedication. Inside the house, their children and grandchildren, for Thomas and Sarah had provided them with two grandchildren already, slept peacefully. Josephine thought about the young woman she had been, convinced she was broken and cursed, and wished she could tell that frightened girl that everything would be all right, that she would find love and build a family and prove that other people's fears and limitations did not have to define her. But maybe, she thought, her story would do that for someone else. Maybe somewhere, there was a woman who thought she could not have the things she wanted, who believed the worst about herself because others had told her it was true. Maybe that woman would hear about Josephine Hayes, who was told she was cursed but loved anyway, who had the children she was told she would never bear, who built a life that exceeded every expectation. And maybe that woman would find the courage to hope, to try, to believe that she too could have the life she dreamed of. As they walked back toward the house, hand in hand just as they had been for 25 years, Josephine felt nothing but gratitude and peace. She had been told she was cursed to never bear children. Preston had loved her anyway, and together they had not just proved the world wrong, they had built something so much better than anyone could have imagined. The house was warm and bright when they entered, filled with the evidence of their life together. Pictures on the walls showed their children at various ages, first horses they had bred, moments of triumph and joy. This was their legacy, not just the successful business but the love they had nurtured, the family they had created, the proof that belief in each other was stronger than any curse. Preston pulled Josephine into his arms in the quiet of their home. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" Josephine asked, though her heart was full. "For saying yes when I asked you to marry me, for trusting me when trust was hard, for building this life with me, for being exactly who you are." Josephine reached up and kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. When they finally pulled apart, she smiled. "Thank you for seeing me," she said simply. "For seeing past what everyone else said I was or was not, and loving the person you found underneath." They climbed the stairs to their bedroom, passing doors behind which their children slept. Each door represented a life that was told could never exist, a miracle that proved there was no curse, only fear and misunderstanding. In their room, Surrounded by the life they had built together, Josephine and Preston held each other close. Outside, the Texas night was vast and star-filled, full of possibility and promise. The ranch that had started as a desperate gamble was now a thriving success. The woman who was told she could never bear children had 4 healthy, happy offspring and was already a grandmother. But more than any of that, more than the success or the vindication or the proof that the curse was nonsense, was the simple, profound truth that love had won. Preston had loved Josephine when others said she was broken. Josephine had loved Preston enough to hope when hope seemed foolish. And from that love had grown everything else. The family, the ranch, the life that now surrounded them. As Josephine drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, she thought about how grateful she was that Preston Hayes had ridden up to her all those years ago, that he had looked past the gossip and the supposed curse to see the woman underneath. She thought about how lucky she was that he had loved her anyway, and in doing so, had helped her prove that she was never cursed at all. She was simply a woman waiting for the right moment, the right partner, the right love to bloom into the life she was always meant to have. And with Preston by her side, she had found it all and more than she could have ever imagined. The story that began with blood on her hands and whispers of curses ended with love and laughter, and a family that filled their home with joy. It was a better ending than Josephine had ever dared to dream, and it was real, solid, and true. They said she was cursed to never bear children. The cowboy loved her anyway. And together, they proved them wrong in the most beautiful way possible, building a life that was full of love, hope, and the kind of happiness that comes from refusing to accept other people's limitations on your dreams.